Okay, so we're going to continue talking about the origin and history of life on Earth here. Again, remember the key here is what can we test scientifically? We talked about the life from another planet hypothesis that is scientifically testable. And then we left off with the last lecture talking about the chemical origin of life, the Miller-Urey experiment, and is that the best scientific explanation for how life started on Earth? So when we're talking about it, we're talking, taking all these different gases, busting them apart with energy that is produced on the Earth, and then the elements recombining back into these various combinations that lead to the basic organic building blocks all life is composed of. So it's thought this is the possible way that this occurred. So then these basic organic molecules start to form. They build the basic cell membrane structure, what we call these protocells. And then is this how the earliest cells arose on Earth, the ones we see in the fossil record? All right, so again, the key here is what can we test scientifically? Now, there are lots of other ideas and possible hypotheses and explanations out there, but which of them are scientifically testable? That's the key. And if you apply the scientific method to an idea, when you're done with your data collection, you're analyzing results, you either support or you reject that idea based on the evidence. So if we said, wow, did life originate from a divine being? We then would build an experiment to test for the presence of a divine being and either support or reject the presence of that divine being based on the evidence. Now the sticky part comes in, hypothetically, completely hypothetical here, if we design an experiment for that and we find the evidence that says here is evidence of a divine being, which divine being is it? What is or who is the divine being? Because if we search human history and we look at human culture, there's a lot of different perspectives on who the divine being is or what the divine being is. Do we go with the Greek mythology? Do we go with the Incan beliefs? Do we go with the Aztecs, the Mayans, the Native Americans, the Judeo-Christian belief, the Hindu belief, the Buddhism, the Muslim? Lots of different viewpoints. So if we use science to prove the existence of that divine being, can we prove which divine being is out there? So, incredibly interesting topic for conversation, but is it scientifically based? So what we're focusing on is what can we see? What can we test? What do we have evidence for? And when we look at the history of life on Earth, we go back to our fossil record. So the fossil record tells the history of the Earth. And this is often found in the sedimentary rock layers. So the thing we want to keep in mind, when rock layers form, what we call sedimentary rock, it takes a long time to build up. And each of these layers here, let me get the highlighter. Each of these layers, that layer versus that layer versus that layer versus that one, etc., is a different window of the Earth's history. It's kind of like chapters in a book. The first chapter is at the bottom. That's where the oldest evidence is always found. And then as we progress upward through the layers, we go to chapter 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, etc., and we tend to get more complexity arising as we move up in the sedimentary rock layer and the fossil record. So this is scientifically testable, and we want to look at the scientific evidence that supports the history of Earth based upon the fossil record and the sedimentary rock. All right, so fossils, when we look at a fossil, fossils are remains of past life. Now, sometimes they're actual physical structures. Here's the leg bone, here's a skeleton, here's the jaw. Other times, maybe it's, here's poop, here's a footprint, here's some kind of evidence, a nest, etc. Fossils come in a variety of forms and shapes and sizes and detail. But that is what we use to study past life. And we often use these things called index fossils. Oh. Oh. Okay, let me get this typed out for us. Okay, so index fossils. Index fossils are specific fossils that will identify a specific period of the Earth's history. They're found in a certain layer of the rocks. So, quick, easy example. Fossil number 6 here. Let's say this particular worm is found in this fossil layer, and we date this fossil layer back 100 and I'm just making up some numbers here, 135 to 212 million years ago. That's the MYA symbol. So anytime we see these fossils, we can assume that that rock layer is between 135 and 212 million years old. So if we go to a different part of the world and we find the same fossils, we know how old that rock layer is. Now, you look at the left, fossil 6 is buried in the middle of that rock layer. You look at the stack of fossils on the right, and fossil 6 is at the top. The reason we see those differences? Geological shifts, geological formations, continental drift, the tectonic plates moving, etc., erosion, weathering of the surface of the Earth, all those things come into the picture. But often index fossils help us put together a picture of these windows of the Earth's history to say, okay, cool, if we see these things, we know they existed during this window, and then they're gone. They weren't there before, they're not there after. Dinosaurs. There's a window of time in the Earth's history when dinosaurs existed, and then they were gone. We've never seen them since. Other species have evolved and shown up since. Humans and dinosaurs, never, ever were they alive at the same time. We didn't exist on the Earth at the same time. So we'll get into that as we start going through the Earth's history here. But to do this, to figure out the Earth's history, we lean on the geologists, the rock folks studying physical science, to help us put together a picture of the history of the Earth, the different time periods across the Earth's history. And what they've done is they've broken up the Earth into these big time periods and then further subdivided them into smaller time periods and continue to break them down into subdivisions of the time periods and so on. And I mean, there's a lot there. For the purpose of what we're doing, we're going to look at the big picture, these things they call eras. You guys want to learn more about it? Take that historical geology course. You'll go into all those little small windows of time. So just the FYI, Jurassic Park, there was a Jurassic period during the Earth's history. That's when the dinosaurs were running around. But I want you guys, for fun, look up the Jurassic period of the Earth's history, and look at the dinosaurs that existed. Are those the same dinosaurs that they were creating during Jurassic Park? Or Jurassic World, or any of those Jurassic movies? Or did they actually bring in dinosaurs that really weren't relevant or present during the Jurassic period? So one of the ways you look at a movie and go, fun, but not that scientifically accurate. So we don't trust it for any kind of science validity when we're watching Jurassic World or Jurassic Park. So, okay, so we're going to break the Earth up into 4, count them, 4 big eras of the Earth's history. The oldest starting era is known as the Precambrian era. All right, now what I want you guys to know from each of these eras, or for each of these eras, are the big key events. What were the major significant events of these eras? Don't worry about memorizing the exact dates. Know the order. What's the oldest? What's the second? The third? What's the current era? We only have 4 to worry about. So that's all I want you to know. 4 eras in progression. So the Precambrian, big major events. life arose during the Precambrian. Prokaryotic life, single-celled. Now, how it got here? Still being debated, still being studied, still being tested. It's all part of science. Once life arose, increased in complexity. We see oxygen being produced during the Precambrian, and eukaryotic cells arise. These are cells with a nucleus. Those things show up during the Precambrian. All right, other major things we're going to see during the Precambrian. These soft-bodied invertebrate animals appear, jellyfish and things like that. We have evidence of these in the fossil record. There's not a lot because a soft-bodied animal doesn't preserve very well, but we do have some remnant or some evidence, some remains of these earliest soft-bodied invertebrates. The diversity and complexity of life started to increase. We see some of these descendants still alive today. So things like sponges, the jellyfish I mentioned, amoebas, etc. These organisms can trace their ancestral history back to the Precambrian. That's when these groups were first arising on the earth. They're still pretty simple, but you know what? Simple works in a lot of cases. The basic simple body plan was functional, it worked, and it allowed these things to survive and then ultimately diversify and change and evolve into other species. Many of these things went extinct, but there still are some out there that are similar to their previous ancestors. Okay, so that's our Precambrian era. Again, the biggest thing, life arose. How it got here, we're still testing it. Oxygen builds up, eukaryotic cells arise, and you get some of the basic simple animal body plans showing up. Now, the Precambrian gives rise to our second era, known as the Paleozoic era. Okay, so Paleozoic. The marine diversity increases dramatically. So life in the ocean explodes in diversity. Lots and lots of new varieties of species and diversity in the ocean. During the Paleozoic, life evolves to a land-based existence. So we see life starting to evolve. It's diversifying in the ocean, but hypothetically, the ocean's getting crowded, there's more competition. So if I can evolve and start using land and nobody else is, hey, bonus. I now have less competition if I have features and traits that give me the ability to adapt to life on land. We'll talk about that in a little bit here. But a lot of diversity is showing up in this short window of time. The reason being, it's not starting from scratch. It's taking existing plans and tweaking and modifying and adapting and evolving and improving on existing structures. So it's like, think about kind of the parallel analogy. How long does it take to upgrade an iPhone? Within 6 months, a new version is out. The i10 is coming out, then the i11, then the i12, and so on. It only takes months now, because they're just tweaking small things. But to get the first one built took a long, long time because they had to establish the basic plan and structure and components. So that's why the Precambrian is such a big window of time to get life, the ball of life rolling, if you want to call it that. But then once it's rolling, it's easy to see things change, adapt, evolve, and diversify. So in the next lecture, we're going to talk about the Paleozoic and look at major events that occurred during the Paleozoic and the big significant things we want to remember.